Let's bring in now Democratic Congressman Ted Deutsch of Florida, Parkland. He is part of Parkland is part of his congressional district, and Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Southern Florida. We really appreciate you both coming on together because this is what it's going to take, right? A bipartisan effort. And so we appreciate both of you being here to figure out if there is any common ground. So, Congressman Curbelo, let me start with you. You're a Republican. I think that this is probably harder for you to talk about. What do you think? Name the one piece of common ground that you think that you can find with your Democratic counterpart.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning. And the truth is, it's not hard for me because it's the right thing to do. I think we should all be inspired by all the young people who are reacting to this tragedy with love and with a desire to get something done. And that's what I want to do. And I think there is a lot of common ground, and every day there's more. I've been talking to a lot of colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, in the last few days, and there is a growing sense that something has to be done. I think some areas where there is a lot of room for common ground is, for example, why is an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old not allowed to purchase a beer at a restaurant, not allowed to purchase a handgun, but can purchase an assault rifle?
Okay,
that makes no sense.
Okay,
that is
fair.
something
So
that
you would
should
have,
definitely change.
Okay, so let's start there. You would have the age limit, the minimum age raised to what, 21?
Definitely, definitely. I think that is a common sense step. Something else that we should do, I'm backing legislation now to expand background checks so that every transfer of a weapon has to be run through the background check system. We also have to strengthen the background check system because we know there have been failures there, and hold the FBI accountable and make sure that threat assessment teams are paying attention to the tips that they're getting, because this tragedy could have, it seems, could have been prevented had the FBI paid attention to two different tips they received. Okay,
Congressman Deutsch, it does sound like there's some common ground here, including this reporting that we just had that the White House has just confirmed to CNN that President Trump also supports expanded background checks. So it seems like there's at least 2 points here. What's your response?
Well, then we should be done talking about this, and these should be passed and signed into law next week when we're back in Washington. Look, I'm introducing legislation this week. It sounds like my friend Representative Curbelo will join in to make sure that you have to be 21 to buy any kind of gun, not just a handgun, but rifles as well. We ought to do that right now. The universal background checks, we ought to do right now. Banning bump stocks, we ought to get done immediately. All of those things can happen. But here's the thing. I appreciate that Carlos supports this. I appreciate that there is at least some indication that the president might be willing. But ultimately, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have to be willing to do this. And I think people, members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, Republican senators who think this is the right thing to do ought to vow that they're not going to support their leader. They should be done voting for Paul Ryan unless he's willing to stand on the side of the victims, the families, the kids, the students from Stoneman Douglas, which is right behind me, who don't view this as something that should be done at some point in the future. It's got to get done now. And then we've got to have the debate, and we've got to move forward on banning assault rifles like they were until 2004.
How about that, Congressman Curbelo? Do you still support your leaders?
So, Allison, two things. Number one, Ted can put me down on his legislation right now. I will add my name to it as soon as he is ready to file it. Number two, I have already talked to Speaker Ryan about allowing the House to debate and consider legislation of this nature. And by the way, I want to thank the Speaker because he was receptive. We had a good conversation.
And is he going to do it?
And I also want to thank him for stopping.
Yeah, did he commit to doing it?
I also want to thank him for stopping in Broward County yesterday and meeting with some of the people who responded to this tragedy. The Speaker did say that he was interested in getting something done. Now, I'm not going to reveal all the details of our private conversation, but the Speaker is interested in responding to these incidents. He knows that we have a lot of work to do, not just on the gun side of this discussion, but also on mental health, also on making sure law enforcement is doing a better job.
Go ahead, Congressman.
Allison, there's not a lot of work to do. That excuse is so tired. There's not a lot of work to do. The legislation for universal background checks, the legislation that says if you're too dangerous to get on a plane, you shouldn't buy a gun, legislation to raise the age that's going to be introduced this week. All of those will be ready to come to the floor next week. I don't want to hear that this is hard and we're going to talk about it at some point and he's committed to engaging in a conversation and eventually having a vote. We should be voting on these things next week, and he should come before the cameras and explain if he's not prepared to do that, why won't he let that happen? And then he should be prepared to have the debate that we need to have about banning assault rifles so that the kind of weapon that's used in mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting, like the one that took place right behind me that slaughtered 17 of my constituents, so that that never happens again.
And so, Congressman Curbelo, I understand that the speaker is interested. I understand everybody's interested. And it's easy to say that they're interested, and I don't doubt that they're interested. But do you sense that there will be something that happens this week in terms of action, in terms of taking a vote?
I think that Republican leadership is starting to realize that Americans aren't going to accept that this is the new normal. Americans aren't going to accept that we may drop off our kids at school one day and that they may not come home because someone slaughtered them. So I cannot speak to a timeline. That's not my decision, but I know that they're aware that something has to be done. I've had very productive conversations. And by the way, whatever we do is going to have to be done in a bipartisan manner. In order for anything meaningful to happen, unless one party controls 60 votes in the Senate, a majority in the House, and the White House, it is going to have to be done in a bipartisan manner. And what I would propose, that rather than pointing the finger, yelling at each other on television, what the American people want to see right now is that leaders are working together, trying to find a way forward. And that's what I'm committed to. I'm willing to work with Ted or with anyone else who is willing to sit down at the table and figure this out in a constructive way, because action is what we need, not attacks.
Go ahead, Congressman Deutsch.
I welcome Carlos's involvement in what is a movement. I talked to one of these high school students this morning who views this, knows this is a movement, and to all of those who say that this shouldn't be politicized. You bet this is politics. Politics is raising your voice. Politics is driving debate. Politics is bringing about change. That's what the leaders of this movement, these young people, these young adults who have now aged far beyond their years because of what they've endured, that's what they're demanding. And it is not enough to say that we need to start having conversations. The time for conversations is over. The time for action is now.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, it sounds like we have reached some common ground, and we will be very interested to see if Congress does move forward these plans to raise the age limit and for expanded background checks. Thank you both, Congressman Curbelo and Congressman Deutsch.
Thank you, Allison. Have a good day.
We appreciate this.